Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky warned the citizens of the United States, US, to continue to support Ukraine against Russia. He responded to comments about the many criticisms from citizens of the United States who protested against the large supply of aid to Ukraine. They assess that billions of taxpayers' money is siphoned off to fund Ukraine. In addition, several U.S. officials have recently voiced concern over the Ukraine conflict and the waning support of the U.S. public for Ukraine. However, President Zelensky has a different view and says this will affect the existence of the U.S. in the eyes of the world. If it stops funding the war effort, the U.S. will lose the leadership position it enjoys in the world, the Ukrainian president said. President Zelensky said if the Americans did not change their opinion, they would lose influence in NATO. If they don't change their opinion, the U.S. will lose NATO. They will lose U.S. influence in the world, he said, quoted by RT. President Zelensky's remarks were in response to a reporter. More and more Americans believe their country is giving Ukraine too much money and support. What do you think? The reporter asked President Zelensky. President Zelensky thanked his supporters in the United States. He then warned U.S. citizens who do not support Ukraine, citing the risks of their opinion. On the other hand, President Zelensky believes the U.S. will not give up on supporting Ukraine. The U.S. will never give up on a NATO member country, said President Zelensky. Zelensky. Russia can attack NATO members. During the press conference, President Zelensky mentioned the risk if the U.S. lowered the amount of support for Ukraine. Later, it could result in Russia entering the Baltic countries that are members of NATO. Until finally, the U.S. had to send its own citizens to fight in defense of NATO members. Russia will enter the Baltic states, NATO member countries, and the U.S. must send their sons and daughters just as we send their sons and daughters to war, said President Zelensky. They will die, he continued, quoted from the Press United. President Zelensky argued that disrupting the flow of dollars to Ukraine would also cost the U.S. the support of its citizens. Are American children different from us? He asked. So far, the U.S. has pledged $113 billion for the Ukraine war effort. The U.S. also vowed to continue pouring money into the Russia versus Ukraine conflict for as long as necessary. President Vladimir Putin. The U.S. wants to split Russia and become the center of the world through the Ukraine conflict. Russian President Vladimir Putin said the war between Russia and Ukraine was linked to the West's goal of dividing Russia and becoming the center of the world. Vladimir Putin said that Western countries, which are allies of the United States, U.S., turn a blind eye to the real goals of the U.S. in this conflict. He gave an example of the U.S. government's attempts to attract European business to the U.S., such as when the Canberra submarine manufacturer abruptly terminated its contract with France and chose to work with the U.S. The Russian president said the Western allies were not protesting for various reasons, mainly economic and defense dependence on the U.S. Putin said the West's plans had already been put on paper, although he did not say where, according to the Telegraph. The Russians will hard to survive. Putin believes that the West also wants to break up the Russian Federation, liquidate the former Soviet Union and control the world's largest producer of raw materials. Then, they would take part of the Russian breakaway country, if Russia split, to set it under their control. Up to that point, he wasn't sure if the Russian people could survive. I don't even know whether an ethnic group like the Russians will be able to survive in the current conditions, with a few Muscovites, Uralians and others remaining in their place, Putin said on TV Russia 1. For this reason, Vladimir Putin emphasized, Russia has no doubts about fighting and will win the war in Ukraine. Commenting on his decision to suspend Russia's participation in the New START treaty, President Vladimir Putin said the move was necessary. He had to temporarily withdraw from the New START treaty in order to maintain Russia's security and strategic stability. NATO intervenes in Russia versus Ukraine conflict. President Vladimir Putin accused NATO members of taking part in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. He considered that NATO members took part in the Ukrainian conflict by donating weapons to Ukraine. Putin stressed that the West plans to divide Russia through this engagement. They are sending tens of billions of dollars in weapons to Ukraine. This is real participation, the Russian president said, quoted by the Telegraph. This means that they took part, albeit indirectly, in the crimes committed by the Kyiv regime, said Putin. He said Western countries had one goal: to break up the former Soviet Union and its main component, namely the Russian Federation. Only then will they perhaps accept us in the so-called civilized society family, but only separately, each part separately, he stressed. US denies wanting to destroy Russia. The United States denied wanting to destroy Russia. While President Joe Biden warned a conflict between Russia and NATO could trigger a third world war, he also said Putin must not stay in power. President Vladimir Putin says tens of billions of dollars worth of US and European military aid to Ukraine shows Russia is now facing NATO alone. Ukraine says it will not rest until every last Russian soldier is expelled from Ukraine, including from Crimea, which Russia annexed in 2014.